The topic is From Plantation to Prison, the historical criminalization of the African American male. And we're talking to the chairperson of the Department of Criminal Justice at Tennessee State University, Dr. DBurris-Kitchen. And of course, Dr. Kitchen, I think we promised you at the end of the first segment that we would give you an opportunity to talk about the historical criminalization of African Americans beginning in the institution of slavery. Let's start that this time.
Okay, as I was mentioning before the break, it was very important to make African Americans out to be, or peoples from Africa, to be people who were non-human, less human than people from European descent. So once that was established, then it was kind of easy, especially under the Christian religion and a country that was dominated by Christian religion, to legitimize the mass enslavement of people of color. And I think at the point of the height of slavery, there were almost 1 million people who were enslaved in this country. And once the ending of slavery took place, of course, and Reconstruction began, African Americans made great progress, great strides politically, economically, things that they were not allowed to do under slavery. They were not allowed access to education. They couldn't practice their own religions. They couldn't be free as people, period. But Reconstruction allowed them the opportunity to do that. But once Reconstruction took place, and I think there were something like 600 legislative representatives that were African American, and 16 or 17 African Americans who were even in the Congress and that were represented during the Reconstruction period. So blacks were making great strides, not only politically but economically as well. Well, it didn't take more than about 24 years before the passing of Plessy versus Ferguson took place, or after Reconstruction, that things started to change as far as, okay, we're going to take away your rights for political activity, your rights to quality education or equal education. We're going to make it separate and equal, which everybody knew that it was not equal. But before I even go into that, I wanted to come back to the Reconstruction period. What happened during Reconstruction also were the black codes, because I jumped way ahead of myself. Black codes were passed not too long after slavery ended. And those black codes allowed people to get incarcerated, people of color specifically, to get incarcerated for violating simple laws like vagrancy, not being able to prove that they had a home, not having money in their pockets, not being able to prove that they had a job. And they could just be locked up for absolutely no reason at all, or for very minor petty offenses. And there were no special courts to provide protection for African Americans who were processed through the system. They were just processed through very quickly. They were convicted. And under that system, over 300,000 between the North and people who were incarcerated in chain gangs, and between the South, those who were incarcerated or were convicted and sent out in the convict leasing system. There were over 300,000 African Americans that got caught up in that system, and the majority of them were caught up in that system because of a petty violation. And they ended up, because they couldn't pay their fines, and they couldn't pay for their housing and their lodging and stuff that was charged to them under the convict leasing system. If they lived on a plantation, they were put right back on the same plantation that they're probably slaves in to begin with. But once they were put in that situation again under the convict leasing system, they never could get themselves out of it. They could never pay their fines off. So they had to work for the plantation for basically the rest of their lives, just like they did under the slavery system. In Alabama alone, there were 40,000 people who worked in the mines, convict leases that worked in the mines. And over 100,000 in the South altogether worked in the mines, were convict leases that were sent to the mines to work. And there was a 20% mortality rate, which means over those years, we're talking a lot of, 5,000 some African Americans died in the mines for probably not having money in their pocket or proof of a job. So the convict leasing period was, while they made progress, it was short-lived, and then all of a sudden
it was better than slavery, but
right,
it was really
better
not
than
the promise.
slavery, but then
It was not the promise that,
a slave is a slave. I mean, tell a person that's under a convict leasing system that you're not a slave. I mean, if you don't have your freedoms, if you don't have basic human rights, then yeah, it might be better. There's actually a book out there that's called Worse Than Slavery, and it looks at the fact that maybe the convict leasing system might have been the way that they treated the people who were under the convict leasing system, because you can, I think actually there's another book called One Dies, Get Another, or something like that. So, I mean, there's books out there that talk about how the convict leasing, because there were so many, and the sheriffs were rounding up so many African Americans at that time, that someone could just go to the sheriff's office and buy a bunch of convicts if some died, in the mines or on the railroads or on the plantation. Same thing in the North, in the chain gangs. They went to prison, and then they were leased out to, as chain gangs to work in the same.
In other words, there's just a general exploitation of really labor, but especially African American labor. Especially when you look in the southern parts of the United States, you find that more pronounced, perhaps, than any other area.
Right.
But there's a general exploitation of American labor during these particular periods. Is that what we're saying?
Exactly. I mean, our country, our economic foundation was built on the backs of free labor, whether it was during slavery or Reconstruction. So it was important to keep the image of the dangerous, lazy African American out there, right? So that the European Americans could, or the white dominant class could continue to exploit people of color in this country for their own advantage, their economic advantage. And if you convict somebody of a crime and you take away their rights to vote, and they never gain any certain political power or the amount of political power that they need to change the system, then it's going to continue. Same with education during the convict leasing period or during Reconstruction. Education was guaranteed to African Americans in a way that it never had been before, but all of a sudden it's like, okay, education is going to include agricultural, certain technology. You can be a nurse, but you can't be a doctor. You can be, it's just limited to, you can go this far, but you can't go any farther than this.
Continued exploitation.
Right. Continued exploitation. So education has always been, I think, an important struggle for African Americans so that they can break this cycle of continuing to be exploited and criminalized.
And of course, Dr. Burris-Kitchen, we're getting ready for our second commercial break, but that's essentially the kind of information we wanted. And I think that when we come back to the second segment, we're going to try to move them into the prisons.
Right.
And I know you've got a lot of excellent information in reference to that. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The topic is from